Hey everyone, I am here recording our first Learn to Play week, and I'm here with Track. So, why don't you introduce yourself, Track?
Hi guys, this is Track. You may recognize my voice from the finals casting. Thank you, Josh, for inviting me along to help with this. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking over this deck list. We're going to be talking a lot about how it's constructed, how it plays, and Track's going to be my opponent for these games. And the big thing that I want to focus on today is having a plan. And that means both looking over this deck and figuring out what the plan of this deck is and within the games. And that's going to inform a lot of our deck choices, a lot of how we're going to make some tweaks to this deck over time. Now, some of you guys might be some pretty advanced players, and I'm just going to warn you, this is mostly for newbies. These cards are almost entirely free cards. I'm going to walk through and quickly explain what they do before we jump into the game. But realize we might focus on some more advanced content later, but this week is very much introduction week. So, without any further ado, let's take a look at this deck. Now, the first thing you want to look at when you're looking at a deck is this cards mana cost thing right here. Oh, disappeared on me. And what you can see with this deck is that it's got a ton of cards that cost 1, a bunch of cards that cost 2, and then very little that cost 6 and 7. So that means is this deck's plan is very much an early game deck. You want to get out there, you want to get a bunch of guys on the board, and then what you're going to want to be doing is controlling the board and getting in damage so you can kill your opponent before they really get to execute their plan optimally. In order to do that, this deck has a couple of cards to support that plan. One of the most important cards in this deck is going to be this Flame Imp. Right here, 1 mana 3/2 is really far above the curve. And the downside, dealing 3 damage to your hero, is a pretty big problem. But if your opponent can't really attack you because you're so far ahead, then it doesn't really matter. Another key card is going to be this Knife Juggler here. This is another 3/2 for not a lot of mana, and it gets an advantage as long as you're capable of constantly keeping it alive and playing lots of guys. Besides that, we've basically just got a bunch of other creatures, see Blood and Peer, Voidwalker, Ironbeak Owl, that serve various different types of utilities, and then a bunch of removal spells like Soulfire and Drain Life and Shadow Bolt to clear the board when our opponent does play something that's a little on the big side. Track, do you have anything you want to add?
That's a pretty fair analysis. The one thing that sticks out to me about this is the amount of spells
Yeah.
versus minions. A lot of times with these early game decks, you really don't want a handful of spells. You really want the minions to be able to trade, control the board. But it's definitely an interesting approach because removal is of course very very important, and there's nothing. A lot of Hearthstone, I think, if you break it down, agnostic of deck lists or players or classes, it's really about your opponent does something and do you or do you not have an answer for it.
Right. And
Or
so
vice
what
versa.
that means is that we're going to be thinking a lot about getting rid of these spells in the early game and trying to draw those answers later.
Yeah.
So I'm going to shut Track off for the games, but we'll be back
Bye
in
bye.
just a second. Bye, Track.